Hello and welcome to this PIR live event webinar brought to you by Partners in Research Canada. My name is Stacey Joyce and I will be your host. If you're joining us live, remember that you can ask questions anytime throughout the webinar by clicking the chat button in the top left corner of your screen, and make sure you include for us where the question is coming from, whether that is your city, your school name, a student name, and make sure you change the to field so that it includes attendees. That way our entire live audience will be able to see what questions are being asked across the country. So today's guest is Dr. Annemiek Farenhorst. She is a professor in the Department of Soil Science at the University of Manitoba. She is also the Prairie NSERC Chair for Women in Science and Engineering and the Principal Investigator for the CREATE H2O program for water and sanitation security in First Nations. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. It's a very nice opportunity to be here. And I'm delighted that there are schools from across Canada. Well, I was listening to you and took notes of the places that I have visited myself. And hello, Ottawa, Kitchener, Toronto, St. John's, Thunder Bay. Those are all places I've been in. It's nice for you to be here, and all those locations that I haven't been. I know now that I have to go there one day.
So thank you so much, and I will let you take it away from here with your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So hello, I know that you are a wide range of ages, and so I'm trying to present this presentation that everyone understands it, but feel free to ask questions. And so I am a scientist, and I do quite a bit of research on drinking water quality in First Nations. And just to have a little bit of a background about myself, you may have recognized an accent, and that's because I was born in the Netherlands, and I went to school, to elementary school and high school there, and then I went to university, the University of Amsterdam. Hello, everyone. So I'm back. The connection was lost. But so here at the University of Manitoba, these are some of my students, and I have students from all over the world. Some are born in Canada, some are born in Bangladesh, Nigeria, China, Sri Lanka, and we all work together on research projects. So as I said, a lot of my research is about water quality. And when we think about the earth, we have a lot of water on earth, but most of that water is salty water, and we cannot drink salty water. We can only drink fresh water. And if you're looking at the amount of fresh water that's available on the earth, what actually is accessible to us, it's a very, very small portion. Only 1% of all of the water that we have in the world is actually accessible to us for drinking, because a lot of the fresh water is tied up in ice caps and so forth. So what we have, that tiny little amount of water that we have to be very careful with it, and we have to preserve its quality. So I can't hear you, unfortunately, but I all want you to think about how many liters of water you think that your family is using on a daily basis. So if you think about how many liters of water you use on a daily basis for cooking, for flushing the toilets, for maybe having a bath or a shower, how much water do you think you use each day? And you can shout it out if you want. So everyone probably has a different number. Now, if you look at the average Canadian, so that means like if we're looking at all of the Canadians and we make a number, what is typical of Canadians, actually Canadians use an average of 300 liters of tap water each day. And that's a very, very, very large amount, 300 liters. And so you use that water for bathing, flushing the toilet, cleaning, doing the laundry, and also for making meals and just drinking a glass of water. Now, if we are thinking about the world, many people do not have a tap in their homes, so they can't get water from a tap. And in fact, more than 3 billion people in the world do not have tap water in their home. And I've been in some countries where people live without running water. And this is an old picture of me when I was a student. And I lived in Kenya in Africa. And I lived in a home for 3 months. And that home didn't have a tap. So you couldn't just get water from a tap in your home. And you couldn't flush the toilet. And so I had to find water elsewhere, and I would take the water from a lake, and it sometimes was dangerous because the lake actually had alligators. So it was kind of an interesting experience for me. But I also met many people that walked for hours just to get water for their family. And, when we're thinking about people not having access to a tap in their home, we usually think about countries far away, like countries in Africa. But actually in Canada, there are also people that do not have a tap in their house. There's no running water in their home. And on the picture, you see an individual that doesn't have a tap in his home. And these homes tend to be on First Nations reserves. So when we're looking at some First Nations reserves, particularly in the Island Lake region in Manitoba, there are many homes that do not have running water. And then you have to get the water from elsewhere, like Mr. Harper here. He's actually getting the water from the lake, and that's not easy, particularly not if it's winter. And sometimes when I think about the many people in Canada, but also in other countries of the world that do not have access to drinking water, sometimes I wonder about why not. And I know that, NASA is planning to go to Mars and they want to have humans on Mars. But I think we first should take care of our own planet and of our own people, and make sure that everyone can have access to clean drinking water. And why that is important is this is a pyramid, and that means that you have to start on the bottom and you have to fulfill those needs before you can move up. And so if we don't have access to clean water, we cannot feel safe and secure. And if we cannot feel safe and secure, it becomes much more difficult to eventually take care of ourselves and our families. So water is a basic need. And the United Nations, which involves many countries around the world, they have agreed that access to safe drinking water is a human right. So it's our rights as humans to have access to clean drinking water. And so how do we know whether water is safe or not? Well, we actually define when water is not safe. So for example, here you see a picture of bacteria. And this bacteria, it's called O15787. And maybe some of you have heard about it, but it's a particular strain of E. coli that is not good for humans. So it can make you feel sick, and sometimes people even die if they are exposed to it. So if we're thinking about drinking water, we want to make sure that it's free of E. coli and other types of bacteria. So if you're looking at drinking water regulations, Health Canada sets certain limits. And so we know that the drinking water should be free of E. coli. There cannot be any coliforming units of E. coli in drinking water. Now, some of you may wonder, what is a coliforming unit? And so I'm just providing you with an example here. You see all those dots on the plate. Each dot is a coliforming unit. So when you're thinking about drinking water, if I would come to your home and take a sample of your drinking water, I should not see what you see now on the picture, because that means that your drinking water contains bacteria that may not be good for you. So I'm going to show you an example of one of our studies, just to give you a picture of what we would find in terms of drinking water in First Nations communities. So for all drinking water, we start with source water. Often that is a lake, because we have so many lakes in Canada. So we use the lake as source water, and that source water is pumped to a water treatment plant. Now, E. coli is something that exists naturally in our environment. So the source water, if we take a sample of the source water, in this case we did that in this lake, what you see on the picture, we would find more than 200 of those spots, coliforming units, on the petri dishes that you just saw. So we know that there are many E. coli in the source water. And then if we take a sample from the water treatment plant, from the water that has been treated, we actually find that there are no E. coli left. So we know that the water treatment plant is doing its job. It cleans the water. Now, when you look at the water distribution in First Nations communities, what happens to the water from the treatment plant after that depends a little bit whether or not you are hooked up with pipes. So if you look at number one, homes are piped, so they're connected with pipes to the water treatment plant. But then there are also homes that are not connected to the water treatment plant with pipes. And those homes rely on cisterns. So the way they get their water is that a water truck fills up at the water treatment plant and then drives to the home. And then the water truck fills a big cistern, so a large water holding tank. And that tank is connected to your home, and that's how you get water. And what we find generally in our studies, people that actually are in homes that have piped water, that are hooked up to the water treatment plant, they have good quality water. But if we're looking at the homes with cisterns, they often have bacteria, including E. coli, in their tap water. And so if we are in those homes, in piped or cisterns homes, the homes look very similar. They all have a tap where the water comes out, but their drinking water is very, very different. And this is actually one of my students taking a sample in a home. So this is a graph, and I don't know how much you are familiar with graphs, but on the y-axis, so the one that goes vertical, those are the number of E. coli and total coliforms, so the number of bacteria that we find in the drinking water or in other water sources. So if you're looking at the first one, the source, that means the source water, so that means the lake. The second one is the water treatment plant. There are no bacteria. The third is the truck. We did not find any bacteria in the truck water. The fourth is the pipeline. So these are the homes that are connected with pipes to the water treatment plant. And again, we did not find any bacteria in the drinking water in those homes. However, when we are in the homes with the cisterns, which is the last one, you see that the bacteria are very high. In fact, the total coliforms, which are a type of fecal bacteria, they are much higher in the cisterns, the tap water of the cistern homes, than they are actually in the lake. So this is I think personally, as a scientist and also as a human being, I think that this is very concerning, because people that live in cisterns home may get sick from drinking this contaminated water. So we also thought to ask people, do you trust your water? Because we found these results, and we thought it would be important to also ask people of whether or not they trust their water. And on the picture here, you see some cisterns. And some of these cisterns, these water holding tanks, are very old. And so what we found when we asked the people, we found that not many people trust their water. And so 3 out of 4 people, they actually buy bottled water. And you spend a lot of money on bottled water. So some people spend less than $50 a month, but then there are also people that have to spend more than $50 a month just buying water because their water is not safe. And then we also learned from the people that have cisterns, these water holding tanks, they're only a particular size. So if you have used up your water, you have to wait until the truck comes and fills in your cistern. So many people experience running out of water, 70%. So 7 in every 10 people that we asked, they actually run out of water. And that's a big problem because then what do? And so some of the things what the people told us is they say that, I don't have good water in my home. And that affects me socially because I can't have visitors in my home. Or some people said, well, I'm running out of water from time to time and then I can't wash the clothes. And maybe my kids get bullied in school because of the dirty clothes. And we also heard from a grandmother that said, sometimes I run out of water and then I can't give my grandchildren a bath. And so, we work with various First Nations communities and we try to advocate, we try to say to the government, we think it's important to hook up homes with pipes to the water treatment plant because then drinking water is much safer than when you rely on a cistern. We also try to advocate, so to try to get more resources that the underground cisterns, which are often very old, can be replaced with above ground cisterns. So water holding tanks that are above ground, and those work much, much better than the underground. And then we're also trying to advocate for more resources so the cisterns can be cleaned when they're contaminated. And we also try to advocate for more funding for testing the water so people actually know whether their water is safe and when cisterns need to be cleaned because it's contaminated. So if you want to learn more about that, you can always contact me because we have written articles about our research. So if you want to look at the scientific study, you can always email me and I can send you an example of what we published. And some of our work is also being mentioned in the media. And why I think that's important is because then more Canadians learn about the situation in some First Nations communities and the poor water quality that is there in terms of the drinking water. And I think that's important because we really, really have to do something about it. And the more Canadians say that we should make improvements, the better. And so this is the website of the program that I run. It's the CREATE program. So that's working with First Nations on water and sanitation security. You can actually look at this website and find contact information from me. And so if you ever want some further information, let me know. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
Well, thank you so much. You can go ahead and click the stop share button there at the top of your screen. And I have been busy queuing up so many questions so far, so I'll get right to them. The first questions are from Ms. Ramirez's class, wondering how many communities don't have clean water in Canada. And related to that, Allison in Aberfoyle is wondering, why do these reserves not have access to clean water, but other non-native communities do? So how many are affected and why?
Yeah. So the number, so there are about 600 First Nations communities across Canada. And at any given time, approximately 1 in every 5 community is under a boil drinking water advisory. And some of these advisories are very short, so it might just be a day. Other ones are very long. So some communities have been under a drinking water advisory for over a decade. Now, there are a number of reasons. So one of the reasons is that some communities do not have a water treatment plant, which is a concern because then it's more difficult to actually supply clean drinking water. But there are also other reasons. So in First Nations communities, in terms of they fall under the federal government, while a lot of the other communities, non-First Nations communities, they fall under provincial government with respect to drinking water. And First Nations communities have long been underfunded in terms of their water infrastructure. So there is currently not enough funding available to actually maintain the infrastructure, including these very old cisterns that are made from cement and they cracked, so the groundwater can go into the cisterns and contaminate the water with bacteria. So really what's needed is resources to have a better infrastructure. And again, the best thing is actually to hooking up people with pipes, but sometimes a new water treatment plant is provided, but then there's not enough funding to actually hooking up people with pipes.
Right. Seems like a very complicated issue to solve. We also have a question here from, I just lost my place here. We have a question from Ms. Larmer's grade 5-6 class at Murray Centennial, wondering how they can help with this problem. Is there anything that these students can do?
Yeah, and I mean it's always good to hear that that people want to help. And I think one of the things what is needed is to talk about it and to understand that we all should try to make a difference and try to improve this. And really, you know, the way things change is if there is a mandate by the government to really focus on a particular issue that's concerning, and we know that Justin Trudeau made a promise of making sure that the drinking water quality crisis in First Nations will be resolved. So if you're thinking about what kids can do, definitely, you know, take action and contact your local politicians and make sure that to indicate to them that you think this is important and that the government should continue to work on this and improve the lives of First Nations community families in First Nations communities.
And you mentioned a little bit about the infrastructure that would be required to sort of solve some of these problems. And we've got a couple questions coming in, including one from Woodbridge. How much money would it cost to equip all reserves with everything they need to maintain a clean water supply?
So there are different approaches. So obviously some communities do not have a water treatment plant. And so those investments are very high. So there was a number that said probably about $7 billion is needed to fix the problem. Now, we think that's a very high number, but if we're thinking about what we invest, for example, in the military, though that is probably the same number, or we make even higher investments in the military. So although it sounds like a large number, it all matters of, you know, where do we put certain resources. In terms of fixing some of the problems, I think a lot of smaller investments will go a long way. So again, if we make sure that we hook up people to the water treatment plant with pipes, or if we replace these very old cisterns with newer cisterns, that will go already a long way. So it's hard to say what's really needed in terms of funding. I mean, that's something that also has to be sort of a plan has to be made, really, and the plan may depend on the particular community. Some communities, they have excellent quality of water. They tend to have more resources to take care of the water situation. But really, the plan has to be made with each individual First Nations to move this forward.
Right. And now a couple questions about the contamination itself. We have a question from Matthew in Ms. Goet's class wondering why E. coli is so dangerous, and Ms. Rice's class is wondering what are some of the effects of poor drinking water. So why is E. coli dangerous, and what are those effects that we're worried about?
Yeah. So I should make clear, so the reason why there are bacteria in there is because if you have cracked cisterns and you get contaminated water flowing in, you have bacteria coming in, but you also have dust coming in, or suspended sediment. And that suspended sediment reacts with the chlorine that's in there to actually kill the bacteria. But when the chlorine reacts with the suspended sediment, the concentration of chlorine goes down and it can no longer control the bacteria. So there are certain reasons why those bacteria are there. Now, what E. coli can do, and again, not all E. coli, there are many different types of E. coli, and not all E. coli are dangerous to you. But some of them, for example, one thing that you can get from E. coli is stomach upset. Diarrhea is something that is common. But then, there are also cases, if you think about the Walkington in Ontario, that actually people died because E. coli was in their drinking water. So it depends. It probably also depends on if you're a healthy individual and you may be less likely to get sick than if you are an older person and have other health problems. So it depends a bit in terms of from human to human, but it may range from all the way to stomach upset and diarrhea to actually death.
That sounds really scary. We take a lot of this for granted when we have piped water in our communities. So maybe something a little more constructive toward the end of this. Where are we headed? What is it that you're researching in terms of perhaps any solutions? And I just heard that there was an announcement recently about the federal government trying to really put an end to this problem by 2021. So do you have any comments of what we're researching now and how we're intending to get there in the next few years?
Yeah, so actually one of the next steps for us is to look at some alternate water treatment options. So we're going to look at UV filtration systems if we can install that in people's homes. So that's one of the things we are doing to really look at could we tackle the problem with newer technologies and how well would they work. On the other hand, we also are looking at some of the other contaminants that might be present in the drinking water. One of the things we are concerned about are antibiotic-resistant genes, and those are basically genes that are associated with bacteria and cause a problem in terms of antibiotics that we ingest while we are sick, that those antibiotics may no longer be working for us. So on one hand, we're continuing the studies to really look at, how severe is the problem from a whole range of aspects, but we're also trying to start working now with engineers to look at some of the newer technologies that may help to clean the water.
And you're obviously very passionate about this issue and your research in this area. We had a few questions from our students watching, wondering how you found yourself in this area. Maybe you could let them know a little bit about your career path. You mentioned your movements around the globe, but maybe within the field, how did you find yourself here?
Yeah. So, I have been a professor for 20 years, so for a long time. And I worked for 8 years in Central America, and I was in very poor communities, and was working with farmers there, and we tried to reduce the exposure of the farmers to chemicals, pesticides, and start better crop production systems and so forth. And so towards the end of my research in Central America, I was at a meeting, and people were talking about the drinking water quality crisis in First Nations in Canada, and I knew very little about that, and I felt quite ashamed that I didn't know much about that, and I was wondering why. And because it was just something that was not talked about, and then many of the people that were talking about it, they were more social scientists and lawyers, but not necessarily a lot of scientists like I am, like a chemist. And so I thought, we should really get a team together and start looking at these issues and possible solutions. And so that's sort of how it started. It was just something that I felt shouldn't be happening, and I still feel that it shouldn't be happening in Canada. And I think the more people are passionate about this issue and want to resolve the issue, the better. And I think it's especially important to train Indigenous students. So the program that we have, one in every 3 students are Indigenous, and so I find it very important as well to contribute to the training of Indigenous students in Canada.